Instead of intro, you are sentenced to some meta community announcements. Yesterday, a really bad thing happened to my life. It will warp everything around me, it will destroy my financial pillow, it will destroy my housing situation, and it will probably destroy more things than not. I planned to release a devlog episode, and it so happened that I recorded the voice track before I knew what was coming. But even moving the mouse is hard for me right now, and I don't have soul capacity to delete the retakes and inhales from my speech, not to mention editing. But the progress is there, the work is done, and there is some solid material in the project. To release at least something, I will feed the uncleaned voice track with like 2 or 3 cuts of raw footage that illustrates the speech. Also in the end of the video there were plans to add a roadmap and some evolution stages estimates. The plan is there, but the timings will be off. I plan to put my life on fast forward mode. Tomorrow the PoE2 league starts, and it will carry my comatose ass into 4th of September. And at 4th, Dota 2 International starts and Silksong releases, I hope. That will carry me for at least 2 weeks onward from there. I understand that fast forwarding life is not an optimal strategy for a public figure, but the only alternative is that same fast forwarding but with alcohol instead, what I don't want. So there will be at least a month of relative activity void out from me. Again, блять. I am very sorry. Thanks to my wonderful patrons who support the channel, and welcome to Project Arena Devlog Series Episode 4. Previous 2 devlogs were technology episodes. First one reviewed our godly controller system based that will facilitate all the actual game system's evolution, and the second one was about the robust animation framework we built to make our skeleton nicely behaved. This episode is reviewing the overall project's progress achieved by combining those technologies to actually build something that starts to look like a working demo. In the core of this stage lives the big logic layer node called combat. As the name prescribes, it holds the information about all stuff related to combat system. First, we have here several booleans that route stuff outside and inside behavior, such as ease in combat switch and slow mode switch. Then there is some target and camera focus related stuff and the information about weapons and stances. More about them later. As logic layers usually do, they have a physics process context update tick that is invoked in the model after the input is gathered, but before the current state thinks on what to do next. This context processing method currently is in the work in progress state and is pretty ugly. First, it processes the camera and target locking stuff. We are making an online fighting game. Camera and its target provide center of coordinates and default movement directions, so it is not simply a presentation layer. It is data available to simulation and prediction. So we process it in physics update, and we will sync the targeting related stuff via the network in the future. Next, we interpret the relay that is our weapon taking button and decide on its output between hiding weapons and taking weapons. Notice that we do this decision based on the is in combat variable, but we don't flip it. This is by design. We interpret this input universally here because there won't ever be a behavior that will want to hide weapons if weapons are already hidden. But the actual variable flipping happens in the states. This will give behaviors more control over what to do with it and will solve a bunch of awkward corner cases for us, such as what happens if we initiated weapons hiding but ran from a cliff or got stunned, did we manage to hide them or not, and what happens with it is in combat variable, etc. Next we manage stances, this one is for later, and finally we choose the default locomotion state. Notice that this is a straight input interpretation outside of the state. But again, this is universal. If you are familiar with the public controller project, you know that there is always a zero priority idle state. It is always present, and if literally nothing is inputted, the system defaults to doing nothing and transitions to idle. In this project, we don't have a dedicated idle behavior. Instead, we have several locomotion behavior modes, and each of those has a different idle action inside. And this universal interpretation does the job of deciding what is the default for the current frame and adding this first behavior into the list. So if nothing is inputted, the system could default to doing nothing, but with the right vibe. But with the right vibe, because we here have like 3 of them. So, locomotion modes. Essentially, we have a 2x2 table. One axis is weapons being hidden or taken out, and another one is the slow mode. And another is the slow mode. First switch is combat readiness. If our weapons are out, several things happen. First, combat locomotion is characterized by character looking at the direction the camera is looking, and if there is no target provided. Target lock is a different story, more on that later and probably in a separate video. So, if there is no target, but the weapons are out, our face is fixed at some horizon point and the left and right inputs invoke strafing with this crab walk. We can hide weapons and when doing it, we go into the peaceful locomotion cycle. Peaceful locomotion is characterized by the lack of strafing. Instead, character just turns to the side the directional input leads it. That provides a more natural and relaxed behavior for peaceful environments, because people don't usually go around things by strafing, they turn with the whole body. And if we flip the slow mode with the N and if we flip the slow mode with the N keyboard input, we do mostly the same stuff. Peaceful mode follows directional input and combat mode creeps around focused on the forward direction, just the animations are slower. To be honest, there is not much functional in them, mainly I added these modes because I have assets to do so, but I imagine in the future the slow mode might generate less sounds for PvP and stealth, or, I don't know, less enemy threat for group PvE bossing encounters, whatever. Next, weapon hiding. They are torso actions, but firstly they are not animated fully, instead they are layered on top of a locomotion state with our new torso overlay modifier. Secondly, they are not bound to one legs, they use 3 of them. Both hide and take actions work with slow mode, default mode and fast mode. Hide weapons accepts that it works in a peaceful mode from the moment of entering into action. Take weapons accept that it works in combat mode. And obviously their slow and default modes are just the corresponding legs behaviors. Hide weapons turns, take weapons strafes, from the start. Also, flipping the combat mode on enter allows for this idle behavior of slowly preparing or unpreparing for battle. When we will get to arcade legs, this will be a sexy leg adjusting step instead of a leg sliding animation blending. And here comes the fast leg behavior. These are 2 separate states, sprint armed and sprint unarmed, but they are split only for the torso part. Below the hips, both of those use sprint legs. Hence, both hide weapons and take weapons torsos also take the sprint legs as their fast legs, and this behavior is the first one that ruins the symmetry. Crabs can sprint, so there is no fast strafing. Instead, the sprint animation is just used with and without. Instead, sprint animation is just used with and without weapons. However, nothing is so simple. In our design, armed sprint is a sort of a black swan. Notice how there is no armed sprint, the picture is Notice how if there is no arm sprint, the picture is quite symmetrical. The sprint follows the directional input as peaceful locomotions do. This is done because in our design vision, sprint is mostly a location traversing state. You press it when your highest priority is to go fast. This location traversing design also integrates into these two sprints transition logics. Unarmed sprint is purely peaceful traversal mechanism and its go up action is mapped into a jump behavior. In contrast with it, arm sprint is a piece of combat environment ecosystem and still maps the go up action into the sidestep to save the access to iframes on demand. But overall, there is a notion that fast traversal is a toy for peaceful existence paradigm. Currently, the armed sprint only sprints for 2 seconds, then remembers that safety rules are written with blood and forces the transition to weapon hiding. And weapon hiding is a trap. It is a breach to a peaceful mode ecosystem, and when animation ends, go fast action is mapped into unarmed sprint instead of armed one. And of course, if one wishes, they can initiate the weapon hiding much earlier with a direct key command. Currently, the combat mode is a single boolean. In the future, I plan to introduce forced peaceful and forced combat modes. For example, forced peaceful mode can be a thing for packed town hall locations or, God forbid, pew parkour missions. That way we have a way to ensure that weapons stay hidden and don't stab our ability to traverse as fast as we need. Probably even the stamina cost of peaceful sprint must be lower to not annoy people that want to go somewhere as fast as possible. Similarly, in dangerous circumstances of being in a boss arena or like 10 seconds after taking damage from player, it is logical to enforce combat mode no matter what player commands, disable the weapons hiding enforcement and guarantee that player has that any time iframe is requested, it can be activated as long as they have enough stamina. And probably arm sprint stamina usage must be a thing player really feels to promote conscious use. Otherwise, people will just hold the go fast button indefinitely as a strictly superior way of existence. Finally, holy mother of input routing, combat stance. This is not a video about game design, it is too early for that. I will only say that in our game, the entity that encapsulates and measures players' moveset is not a weapon. Instead, movesets will be organized into combat stances. A weapon kit will consist of a number of stances, ideally 3 to 5 stances. And during the building stage of the gameplay, players will choose a subset of them to take into the next fight. First, all stances modify the locomotion and idle animations. This is me staying in a def-layer stance called stance 1. Now I press the stance switch button and my torso overlay changes to another one that corresponds to the stance 2. An attentive viewer might have noticed that my idle animation for combat mode doesn't stack very well with combat mode locomotion package. And it is true. The reason is we plan to change it, and as it is right now, we have several stances and stance-related assets in planning, and they more or less are based on this idle pose, and it is super duper mega obvious that torso overlaying technology is the ultimate key to bringing stance overlays to life. But because they are based on this pose, they don't really stack with previous jogging locomotion. Of course, torso overlay can glue two assets together, but there is a point after which no amount of gluing can marry two assets that are just too different. So right now, stances do look a little bit off, but we plan to have here another locomotion package created based on this idle pose instead of the current jog strafing. And that's completely fine. This demo's mission is not to look good, it is to provide a nice vertical slice of the combat for the next step. So, stances. First, they are quite a universal mechanic. A lot of behaviors will be affected by stance, so here I created a boolean export field in base torso behavior panel. If it is set to true, on internal enter state we also enable torso overlay animation that plays our stance. Secondly, stances help us map some inputs. To be honest, I feel very empowered by not having the need to support a completely bland and universal public controller core. Now I can include specific project-related things as low and as internally as I want. So I created another export boolean checkbox that enables or disables stance mapping for a behavior. If it is true, in the transition logic processing, we map the input package with our stance. In parallel with controller project, this is similar. In parallel with controller project, this is similar to the weapon class. We have an attack action, but attacking invokes different states depending on the stance we use. From the data perspective, From the data perspective, stances are resources that are stored in the combat node. Later they will obviously have names, descriptions and modified movesets attached, but for now they are just stance 1 and stance 2. To make stances work differently, I have here 4 combo series assembled from random melee assets. Stance 1 has 4 generic slash attacks in light attack series and 2 heavy attacks in heavy series. And stance 2 I tried to assemble similar to some gladiator martial combat series. Here we have a kick, a short slash and a shield dash. Considering defenses, both stances just use shield block for now. Stance switch is a short action that practically just lingers while one stance slowly blends into another one, but it is invoked only if stance switch request finds the controller in some locomotion state. Because switching of the stance is not a full action per se, but something that happens in character's mind, if our torso is locked in some continuous action, we just switch it instantly. For example, I can enter a role from one stance, switch it, and just exit the role into different one. Or even initiate one stance's attack, switch the stance while it is active and continue with the strike from another stance. Currently it just plays the series from the start, but we are brewing something around the idea that if you played end strike over the series, then another stance continues with n+1 strike in another stance series, but that requires conscious asset planning, etc. This is our small but proud melee foundation. We also planned some magical strike modifiers, think similar to Souls 3 or Elden Ring's weapon arts, but that's the stuff for later. And we also have several traversal skills, 8 animations for rolling. In our vision, roll is more of an immediate mobility skill than an iframe provider, similar to how Witcher 3 handled it. For an access to some mobility and stable iframe, we have a quick sidestep. 8 animations as well. We also have a slide action that invokes from sprint action after some momentum was stored. Slide action is in a bit of a limbo status. For a nice sliding experience, you need a lot of constants figured out, like friction coefficients, direction maneuverability dependent on speed, maximum and minimum speed fading depending on the slope angle, etc. I have here all these parameters in the system to play with, but I didn't really test constant combinations too far. Currently we have a pretty arcade-ish slide and I will just leave it as is till later stages. And finally the jump. As I said, jump can be accessed only from unarmed sprint, and jump is pretty raw as well. Because our landing animations are broken currently, I didn't sweat too much. This is a complete stop. I just slapped a vertical velocity that decays over time and called it a day for now. So, Why am I making this unpolished demo a distinct step in the development roadmap? Why am I proud we have it in the current state? Well, I am about to do a leap of faith and embrace some fading fast philosophies. The thing you see before your eyes is a micro version of the game. It has one level, one weapon, two stances that you can switch between, some traversal moves and the basic attack series for each stance. This is what is called a vertical slice. Precisely this is the vertical slice of the combat controller. And the next devlog episode for this project, I predict you will see in about 3 to 4 months. I really hope. And if earlier, then I will consider myself a god in flesh. Having this vertical slice, over the next 3 months I plan to make this demo into a working multiplayer prototype, with all big boys toys like client prediction, authoritative server, and reconciliation if client mispredicted an input outcome. With some side effects of replace storage ability and deterministic resimulations from a snapshot, what is known as a superpose. I want to do it because the project is planned to be a native multiplayer game first. I want to do it because the project is planned to be a native multiplayer game, not just a 3D game with some multiplayer capabilities. And complex networking is at such a warping logic layer, it affects every single one of your systems when it is introduced. And the less you have when introducing multiplayer, the easier your life will be later. If you have, let's say, 100 features planned and the multiplayer, it is multitudes times easier to create multiplayer when you have 10 of the 100 features ready, and then do the rest 90 over the multiplayer. Then to create a multiplayer from zero that needs to work with a system that already has 100 of features. And in the language of the previous metaphor, this vertical slice is my set of 10 features prepared. And in the language of this metaphor, this vertical slice is my set of 10 features prepared. This is the project's roadmap though. What about the channel? Well, obviously, to not die as a creator, I will release some materials during the period. It just won't be the devlogs. I have a new series in mind. Recently I got not one but 2 new patrons almost simultaneously that just wanted to abstractly be better in Godot, had previous programming experience but weren't very familiar with the engine. So I decided to launch my paid Godot course. Buy now for a mere $25 to become Godot Pro, over 10 hours of lections and a course project that will prepare you for making your own godly games. ! Ooh, nah, I can do it. Sorry, capitalism, I am not a course gypsy. However, it is apparent that the request is out there. It might also benefit the channel to get some newbie-friendly content. So, over the next couple of months that I will work on the project's multiplayer, I want to test waters with a new series called Advanced Newbism or something. This will be a format specifically teaching Godot, with the consideration of the viewer being new to the engine, but without the consideration that viewer is a stupid person that needs some basic bullshit pushed down their throat. Maybe it will fly, maybe not, we will see. By the way, patrons can vote on the exact video order, so yeah, subscribe if you want to support the channel. Also press the goddamn YouTube stuff.